Hello everyone. I would like to dedicate this video to exploring the question of whether or not the ancient Iranians were largely of Nordic European stock and they would be genetically closest to contemporary Nordics. Now, this is a question which I haven't really discussed in great detail and I haven't really looked into it. But in this video, I just like to look into it and I would like to assess this matter and present a very unbiased overview of this matter. So without further ado, I will begin. Now, during the 19th and 20th centuries, many individuals of Western origin, specifically those from Northern Europe, propagated a view that the ancient Iranians were largely a Nordic European peoples, and this Nordic population subjugated a native population in Iran and established the great Median and Achaemenid empires. And this is largely now been disproven by genetic evidence. But anyways, this myth asserted that the ancient Iranians were a Nordic population, and this has been unfortunately repeated by many in white nationalist circles today, as well as individuals such as Jason Reza Jorjani. But anyways, the fact of the matter is that the ancient Iranians were not a Nordic population. I've discussed it in my previous videos, but I just want to dedicate a video to this, and there's a very good reason for this. So to begin, the Proto-Indo-Europeans were largely a European population and clustered closest to contemporary Europeans. They were derived from Caucasus hunter-gatherers, which was closest to Iranian farmers. Sorry, they were closest to Neolithic farmers from Iran and Eastern hunter-gatherers, which was the European population, and they had mixed and they produced the Yamnaya people, and the Yamnaya people were the Proto-Indo-Europeans. They migrated into Europe and they had mixed with the native European farmers to a degree to form the corded ware culture, and from the corded ware culture you get the Proto-Indo-Iranians. These Proto-Indo-Iranians were Nordic Europeans. They were the Androno, Sintashta, and Strubnaya people. These are just cultures. They didn't call themselves this. So the Proto-Indo-Europeans were Nordic Europeans, but nonetheless, they weren't. They were very advanced. They did have the chariot, but they were not urbanized, and they did not have a high cultural output in terms of their society. They were a very basic society, but they were very powerful, and they did have the ability to expand very rapidly. And once they arrived in Central Asia, they met with another population, and these were the Neolithic farmers from Iran. Sorry, the farmers from Neolithic Iran, or the Neolithic Iranian farmers. Although they did not speak they did not speak an Iranian language, they were nonetheless the natives of Iran prior to the migration of the Indo-Europeans. But in Central Asia, these two populations met and they sort of coalesced into one population and they merged. And what resulted from this merging of these populations was the early Iranians. Sorry, the early Iranians, and these early Iranians were not Nordic Europeans as they cluster close. And sorry again, I'm not using a script, but anyway, these early Iranians were not Nordic Europeans. They clustered closer to the Yagnubi peoples, and these early Iranians were around 58 to 65% Nordic, and the remainder was Iranian farmer derived. So the remainder of their ancestry was Iranian farmer derived, and these Iranian farmers were actually very advanced for the time. They had urban settlements. They were an urbanized community, and they were not very weak or very backwards as many have asserted, but they were very advanced people, and they established great civilizations in Iran as well. The Elamite civilization in South Asia, they established the great Indus Valley civilization, and in Central Asia they established the great Oxus culture and the BMAC civilization. And the BMAC civilization specifically was very advanced for a time. It had urban settlements, and once these Indo-European steppe peoples, these Nordic steppe peoples, migrated into the heartland of the BMAC culture, they had mixed with the native Iranian farmers to form the early Iranian pastoralists, and these pastoralists then migrated into Iran and had mixed with the native Chalcolithic Iranian derived populations. but this is significant, for this admixture produced the modern Iranian genome, the Iranic genome, and this Iranic genome is composed of Indo-European steppe ancestry as well as a native Iranian farmer ancestry, and this is significant. Many believe that the early Iranians were Nordic, pure Nordic Europeans, but this is not true, as there was significant influence of BMAC on them, and we have an early Iranian sample from Turkmenistan, and that sample actually has around 58 to 65% steppe admixture and 35 to 42% native Iranian farmer admixture, and this is quite significant, sorry, as this Iranian farmer ancestry is absent in Europe. So the early Iranians, those responsible for the Persians, the Medians, the Bactrians, the Sogdians, the Khwarezmians, as well as the Parthians, all had BMAC ancestry. They were all BMAC derived. The only two Iranian tribes which did not have significant BMAC ancestry were one of them was obviously the Scythians, and the other was the Sarmatians. These two tribes did not have any BMAC ancestry and were not admixed with the native farmers of the BMAC culture, as recent genetic studies have proven. They were very distinct. Most Scythian populations on the eastern fringes of Central Asia were actually significantly admixed with East Asians, and the Sarmatians were not really admixed with East Asians, but they were fairly close to contemporary Northern Europeans. But these were the only Iranian populations which were not heavily admixed with the BMAC civilization and the peoples of the BMAC culture, but all other Iranian populations. So the Sogdians, the Bactrians, the Khwarezmians, the Parthians, the Persians, and the Medians, and many other tribes from Iran, which settled in Iran, were already heavily admixed with the native Iranian farmers of the BMAC culture, and this is quite significant. Now, another thing to take into account here is that by the time the Achaemenid Empire rose and established itself, the majority of Iran's population was already Indo-Europeanized, and they already had assimilated the native Iranian population, and the majority of the ancient depictions of the Achaemenids reflect phenotypes of modern Iran, not Nordic or European phenotypes, but phenotypes of modern Iran, and these were they resembled modern Iranians. And what's interesting here is that this population is the one responsible for the great achievements of the Iranics. The Iranic peoples, their achievements are a byproduct of the Indo-European steppe pastoralists, as well as the native Iranian farmers of the BMAC culture, and there's actually been significant BMAC influence on the Iranian languages, as there have been a lot of studies done on this from Harvard, and these studies have shown that there is a great deal of linguistic influence of BMAC on the native Iranian languages, and this is quite significant as well. All the great significant Iranian civilizations were derived partly from the BMAC culture, and these populations had significant BMAC influence. When you look at the Khwarezmians, the Sogdians, the Bactrians, the Parthians, as well as the Persians and the Medians, all of them had BMAC ancestry, and they were not Nordic or European. The only the only Iranian populations which were close to Nordic Europeans were the Scythians and Sarmatians, and both of them did not achieve anything notable. They were great fighters, but they were not that notable in terms of their academic or intellectual output. They were very backwards, and they were considered to be barbarians. And so my point was here just to stress that the BMAC civilization had a major impact on the synthesis which produced the Iranians, and the Iranian people of today are descended largely from Indo-European steppe pastoralists, early Iranian pastoralists, and the native populations of Iran, and have very little recent Semitic or South Asian or East Asian influence. Yeah, but that's essentially it. I have a few other things to say. I think that many people overlook this fact, and that's why they fail to realize that the ancient Iranians are indeed the modern Iranians, and these two populations are indeed very related, and the modern Iranians are direct descendants of the ancient Iranians, and those Iranians responsible for the great cultural achievements of the ancient Iran were like modern Iranians. Now, here are just ancient depictions of Iranians, from the Achaemenid period to the modern period, and you can clearly see that they do not have a Nordic or European phenotype. All of them do not have a Nordic or European phenotype. They clearly have an Iranian phenotype. They clearly have a phenotype which reflects the modern Iranian populations, not the ancient Nordic or European populations. Despite having roots in Europe and despite having Nordic origins, the Indo-Iranians, by the time they entered Iran, were heavily admixed with the people of the BMAC culture, and that's why you get these faces which are clearly Near Eastern and are not Nordic or European faces. You can again see all of these depictions are clearly Near Eastern depictions, and what they show is a clear Iranian phenotype. So again, this is an Iranian phenotype. This is not a Nordic or European phenotype, and there is a lot of genetic evidence now suggesting that there was a process of BMACization, and this process is what formed the contemporary Iranian populations. And the ancient Iranians were not Nordic or Europeans, as has been falsely asserted by the enemies of Iran Shah. And this is essentially it. Individuals such as Jorjani, who attacked the Iranian identity and claim that ancient Iranians are Nordic Europeans, are greatly, they're misinformed and they don't know the realities behind this fact. But yeah, that's essentially it for this video. Thanks for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe.